Hey, so welcome. I am Bruce Sabin. Some of you might know me because I am involved with the campus ministry here at Florida Poly University Church. But today I am here to talk about steampunk, dieselpunk, and punk rock. So how many of you are familiar with steampunk? Almost everybody. How many of you are familiar with dieselpunk? Okay, more than I expected, because most people have no idea when I mention dieselpunk. And how many of you are into punk rock? Not into, but you're familiar with it. Yeah, you remember it. You remember it. Okay, so we're going to start with a little trivia here to see who really knows their punk rock. But what is this? And they're the dead Kennedys. They're all dead. Okay. So, the dead Kennedys. Okay, so when we talk about steampunk, dieselpunk together, we're talking about something called retrofuturism. And we'll get into how that relates to punk rock later. But first, we need to know what retrofuturism is. So it's an artistic movement imagining a future based in the past. Or another way to think about it is how did the past, or people in the past, think of the future. So we can see some examples of how people in the past thought of the future. You guys have probably seen some of those things online about, people in the 60s thought today we'd all have hovercrafts and, weird things like that. Well, in the late 1800s, there was a series of French postcards that imagined the world in the year 2000. So here they are. It's basically people looking like they're in the late 1800s, but they're riding around on little skates that are electric powered. So how accurate is that? Very. Wow. Kind of depends on the fashion, not so accurate. Today we have these little electric powered hoverboards that we ride around on and stuff like that. So, okay, they imagine some, but one thing that's always interesting is they always imagine the fashion kind of the same. Or they go like the Woody Allen sleeper type thing, if you've ever seen that movie where everything in the future is like white and sterile and, basically like this building. So, one of those two things. Here's another one of the postcards. The farmer sitting around just pulling some levers, pushing some buttons, and, electrical wires everywhere. So again, if you've ever seen pictures from the late 1800s, early 1900s, there were first electrifying things, there were wires running everywhere. So they kind of imagined the future would be the same thing, just more so, even out on farms and stuff like that. Here's another interesting one, a video phone. So again, this is well over 100 years ago, and they're just trying to think of this new technology of telephones, what's going to be in the future. And they imagine the same kind of contraption, these big phone things and all that kind of stuff. But then there's some big light bulb projecting an image. But of course today we have FaceTime and Google Hangouts and all these things, so not too far off. This one, not so much. Firefighters in the future would have bat wings and fly around and rescue people.
Helicopters dropping water.
Okay, we do fly, and this is the late 1800s, so this would be before anybody flew. This is before the Wright brothers, although the concept of flying was kind of a dream, but nobody had actually done it yet. And then if we get into like the 1940s and things like that, there's still predictions of the future, and we still predict the future today, so nothing different. These are from advertisements from an aluminum and metal manufacturer predicting future technologies, of course, largely built out of their product. But just like the styles of the 1940s, very streamlined and modern looking, just imagining themselves in the future, just more high tech, but still basically the same styles. Okay, so now we're going to get into steampunk specifically. It's a retrofuturism based on the Victorian era, or the steam engine era. So you're taking the technology of the Victorian age, late 1800s into the early 1900s, the style of the Victorian age, and then bringing it into the future. So what if we didn't have all this, computerized high-tech stuff, but we were living today with the same fashions and basic technological structures as Victorians. So first we're going to talk about the worldview of steampunk. First, steampunk is a positive worldview. It comes out of the Victorian age, which was a very positive time. In literature and art, it was romanticism was the big idea at the time. We'll talk about each one of these more in detail. Part of that positive and romantic sense was a very expansive view of their place in the world. And in England especially, it was imperialistic. In the US, manifest destiny, if you remember your world history and US history classes. We'll get into that. And then in terms of religion, post-millennialism. We'll explain each one of these. So first, romanticism. Romanticism was a reaction against the Enlightenment of the 1700s and early 1800s. In the Enlightenment, everything was about reason and logic, science, only those empirically based things that you could test and prove, getting rid of your own biases and all that kind of stuff. Well, in a reaction to that, they went into romanticism where they emphasized feelings and senses. So we think of literature like Frankenstein, pretty much everything from Edgar Allan Poe, Jules Verne, which fits really well into steampunk because of the technology and the predictions of the future, like submarines and things like that. Moby Dick, Dracula, these are all very romantic writers and writings because they emphasize passion and feeling. And then in paintings, you have Impressionism and Hudson River School. So for paintings, we have like Impressionism. Here's a perfect example of Impressionism from Claude Monet. This is his wife and son. So when you look at something like this, what does it make you feel? Peaceful? Okay. So it's supposed to make you feel connected to nature, make you feel joy, make you feel some sort of passion. So again, it's coming out of that romanticism. So very beautiful, very human looking. And then in the American side, so Europeans were really into Impressionism. On the American side, we developed what's called the Hudson River School. And Hudson River School was really into massive landscapes. So here's a good example, Mount Washington in New Hampshire. And what do you think about when you see this? Majesty. What's that? Creation. There's this idea in America that America is this massive, untouched land with unlimited possibilities and resources. That we are going to go and we are going to take this land and improve it and make it better and improve the whole world through that as we get into manifest destiny. So again, this is romanticism, but Americans had a different view on it because of the nature of America being this wide open landscape of unlimited resources as they saw it at the time. So steampunk was expansive. In Europe, especially in England, there was the British Empire. So expansion meant expanding the empire and bringing civilization to the entire world. In the US, manifest destiny. So let's listen to the song real quick. So what is this song? Pomp and Circumstance. What's it for? Graduations. Okay, so it has become the song or the music of graduations. But it actually began, and it was written in 1901 for the coronation of King Edward VII, and it was a military march. So we marched to graduations with it, but it began as a military march. For King Edward II, so at the end of the Victorian period, going into Edwardian. The title, Pomp and Circumstance, comes from a line in Othello, Pride, Pomp and Circumstance of Glorious War. So it's a military song. And in fact, it actually has lyrics. The version with lyrics is called Land of Hope and Glory. And I'll play a little bit of that for you so you can hear the lyrics. wider still and wider shall thy bounds be set. God, who made thee mighty, make thee mightier yet. So again, this very imperialistic sense at the end of the Victorian age into the early Edwardian age, right around the turn of the century, this idea that England was going to expand and expand and expand and bring peace and civilization to the entire world. So that was kind of the concept of that steampunk era, that Victorian era. And we can see on this map here, if you don't remember your world history again, but all these different colors showing the slow expansion over time of the British Empire. So blue, yellow, and red were all part of the British Empire by the time of World War I, which kind of marks the end of the steampunk era. So Britain was taking over a massive part of the world at the time, and they just thought that they were bringing peace and prosperity, civilization to the entire world. So it had that very positive outlook. In America, we had Manifest Destiny. So this painting, American Progress, kind of perfectly illustrates what Americans thought of as their role in the world, whereas the British thought they were bringing British civilization to the entire world. Americans thought it was their destiny to take over all of North America, and then through that, be a light and a beacon of civilization to the entire world. So what do you see in this painting? What does it represent?
God's on their side.
Yeah, God's on their side. And what else?
It's how like the light is moving across.
Yeah, so it starts dark over here and light is coming across with them. It's all the movements toward the west. What else changes from one side to the other?
The technology.
Technology. So,
Development.
yeah, so you have the Native Americans here, then you have the early pioneers, then you have the stagecoaches, you have the trains, and this woman is bringing with her a telegraph wire. Now, one thing you can't really see in here, when I zoomed in for the next one, is the book she's holding says school book. So she's bringing education, wisdom, civilization with her. So you have the light, which represents all sorts of things, but all this positiveness coming with her. She's bringing technology, she's bringing civilization, she's bringing education, and of course, again, they're moving west. So this is Manifest Destiny, America bringing all of this good stuff west across the continent. So steampunk, along with this Victorian age, and religion from that age, not necessarily from steampunk, but that age was very positive, and that's illustrated through a religious idea called postmillennialism. The idea that Christianity will usher in a worldwide peace and prosperity, mankind's rightful dominion over the whole earth, peace, prosperity everywhere, and then after that, Jesus will return. But before Jesus returns, mankind has to make a perfect world, and that's going to happen. So again, that sort of very positive outlook, both in England, in the European continent, in North America, very positive time. So, steampunk, a positive, romantic, expansive, post-millennial concept in terms of its values and beliefs. Now, if you're into cosplay, typically steampunk will be represented through brown leather and brass and machinery with exposed gears and intricacy. So we see things like this. But again, coming from that sort of civilized, positive sense, it will often be very genteel, even aristocratic. So, the woman on the right there, she's, this sort of aristocratic woman on safari. This guy's got his nice, outfit, his vest and everything, very aristocratic looking. Now, some aspects of steampunk can even be into pirates and cowboys and stuff like that, but even then, it's an adventurous sense, so it tends to have a positive outlook. It's not a negative or dark view of, say, piracy or the West or anything like that. So steampunk tends to be very positive. So if I was to make a steampunk character, I've thought about this before, my steampunk character would be based on the preacher from Pale Rider. So how many of you have seen Pale Rider? If you haven't, you should see it. It's a great movie. This guy, Clint Eastwood, plays a preacher slash gunslinger. So you can't get better than that. So now we're going to get into Dieselpunk. Dieselpunk is also retro-futurism. So we're imagining the future based on some period in the past, but instead of the steam era, we're into the diesel era. So very different worldview though. It is pessimistic and dystopian. Instead of being expansive, looking to expand empire or manifest destiny, expand over the continent, it tends to be more isolationist in worldview. Premillennialism, military and musical styles. It's a very visual and very musical genre, where steampunk tends to be a more literary-based genre. So we have to transition, though, from steampunk to dieselpunk. There's sort of a gray line where that happens, generally in that 1912, 1914 range. The sinking of the Titanic in 1912 represents a rather sad era in that idea of that positive, expansive, technological future that steampunk represented. All of a sudden, there was this massive disaster. You know, it was supposed to be the ship that couldn't be sunk, and now it sank and thousands of people died. Along with that, we have the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914 that signaled the beginning of World War I. And then also, at that time, we have the Panama Canal opening, which isn't a bad thing, but it represents a major change in the technology into that diesel era of world trade through big ships and things like that. So these are all kind of good milestones for the transition between steampunk and dieselpunk. That was the beginning of dieselpunk. Some would end dieselpunk at the end of World War II. So basically, it's from the beginning of World War I to the end of World War II. That marks a good idea for the values, that pessimism and everything. But some people would continue it through 1957 at the launch of Sputnik, because that ends the diesel age and begins the space age. So somewhere in that 1945, 1957 range, you're in it. And then after 1957, then you get into cyberpunk or atomic punk and those other genres. So dieselpunk is dystopian. If we look at the literature, and we'll talk about movies and stuff like that, but in literature you have F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. So talk about starting with World War I. So you have World War I, and then you have the Depression. But what time period was between World War I and the Depression? The Roaring 20s, okay? And then you get into World War II after the Depression. So you kind of have these negative periods, World War I, the Depression, World War II. We have this sort of positive time of the Roaring 20s, but even then, there was a lot of nihilism that comes out of World War I. So if you read like The Great Gatsby, you know, there's these World War I veterans who come back, and they really don't have any value system. Their values have been destroyed by the war. So now they're just trying to get rich, trying to get drunk, you know, they're just partying. So The Great Gatsby has that sort of negative connotation. You know, the world is this big party and everybody's rich and all this sort of stuff, but really there's no point in any of it. It's just, you know, trying to get through life. Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, a very dystopian novel about the future. George Orwell's 1984, again, very dystopian. Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, dystopian. William Golding's Lord of the Flies, dystopian. William Golding's story is really interesting. He was a teacher at an elite boys' school before World War II. And he just basically worked with really rich kids who are going to have, you know, they're going to go off to Cambridge and, you know, Oxford, and they're going to be, you know, the modern aristocracy and everything. And during World War II, he saw people do utterly horrible things to each other. And he thought, how can people do that? How can people be so evil? And when he went back after World War II to teaching, he started paying more attention to the boys and realized that they're basically Nazis, that they treat each other horribly. So he realized that if you took a bunch of young boys, even from, you know, upper class and everything, and you stuck them on an island without supervision, they're going to become monsters. So that dystopian nature, that human nature is bad. In the 1930s and 1940s, you get film noir, those sort of old crime dramas, mobsters and things like that, very dark imagery. And then you get the serials, the Buck Rogers, and all those sorts of things that come in. So this is where we also get Indiana Jones and Star Wars. We'll talk more about them later. But Spielberg was a big fan of the serials, the Dick Tracy's and all those sorts of things. Those series of movies where they just sort of made them endlessly. You know, the character just kept going on from one situation to another. And both Indiana Jones and Star Wars were sort of based on that for Spielberg. So he really liked that time period. But Dieselpunk, instead of being very positive, is very dystopian. So the attitude change from steampunk to dieselpunk can be described partly based on attitudes toward war. So in the Victorian age, the Victorian era, people generally thought of war as this gallant sort of adventure. And you're going to go off and you're going to become a hero, you're going to defend the crown, all that kind of stuff. And then World War I marked a very significant change in how the average person viewed war, because World War I was utterly horrible. Trench warfare was equally miserable for officers and enlisted alike. Prior to that, officers especially could be basically assured that war wasn't going to be that bad for them. They weren't going to be injured, they were going to be taken care of, they were going to come home as heroes. But that changed very dramatically in World War I. Although again, that divided line isn't perfect. Photography was a new invention at the time of the Civil War, so people started to see the truth of war. And then even later on into the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was still this sort of sense of war as an adventure. If you're familiar with Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, he basically wanted to be a hero, and he went and became a hero. And that was his goal. So premillennialism, in this case, things are going to get worse before Jesus returns. They're just going to keep getting worse. If you're familiar with the concept of a tribulation, a time period. So steampunk, post-millennial, that things are going to get perfect, and then Jesus is going to return. And premillennialism that arises at this time, things are going to get really, really bad. So again, that pessimism and dystopian nature. It's also isolationist instead of expansive, instead of manifest destiny and imperialism. The U.S. sort of tried to be isolationist before World War I and World War II. In both cases, we did some secret things to help and everything, but we officially were isolationists. We did not want to expand. Then after World War I, Woodrow Wilson came up with the idea of a League of Nations, and all these nations would come together and cooperate and bring in a peaceful age. And the United States rejected that idea. Side note, Woodrow Wilson was a post-millennialist. He thought that the world was going to get perfect, that we were going to unite and work together and bring peace and prosperity to the world. So the League of Nations made perfect sense to him. Of course this is going to happen. But people had moved into this idea that it's going to get worse instead of better, and largely rejected the League of Nations. Dieselpunk, because of that time period from World War I to World War II, has a military aesthetic. So Dieselpunk cosplay is often very militaristic. So Nazis figure very big into Dieselpunk, or even if you go back a little bit further into World War I, you don't have the Nazis, but you have that sort of Kaiser German sense. So Dieselpunk art, again, often very militaristic. And here you have some Robocop Stalin. So you have the Nazis, you have the communists, you have all the evil in the world, but they're robotic. The aesthetic steampunk features over-designed inner workings of machines, lots of gears. That's kind of like the thing in steampunk. It's gears everywhere. You can see every little detail. Things were custom made, crafted and fine. Again, that sort of aristocratic nature. Dieselpunk tends to be more streamlined. It comes from an Art Deco and streamlined modern movement. I'll show you some examples in just a moment. It's an era of mass production instead of custom-made things. So much so that, again, even killing became brutally efficient, chemical weapons and machines and things like that. Part of why World War I was especially horrid. So Art Deco features big into Dieselpunk. Sometimes Dieselpunk is actually called Deco-punk because of the Art Deco nature. If you're not familiar too much with Art Deco, the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, very modern looking, but also pretty intricate, very detailed. But then toward the end, so that was 1920s and 1930s, into the 1940s, you get something called streamline modern, which is an outgrowth of Art Deco, but it's much more streamlined. And this comes from sort of the jet age. You get rounded edges, you get straight lines, very smooth, very aerodynamic. So still Art Deco-ish, but much more streamlined. So hence the term streamline modern. So Deco punk or diesel punk has a lot of the militaristic aesthetic, but also the Art Deco or streamlined modern aesthetic. So if we go back to this picture here, we see the militarism. It's a military craft, but a very streamlined, aerodynamic, mass-produced look. So I'm going to show you a couple of movie trailers that kind of illustrate Dieselpunk, because again, it's something that not as many people are familiar with, and it's a very visual genre. This is a movie starring Jude Law, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Angelina Jolie. 3 big names, but you've probably never heard of the movie, right? How many of you have heard of this movie? Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I've heard of it.
You guys came in prepared. So, okay. So anyway, there we go. I was gonna joke. It's the movie with 3 stars that you've never heard of the movie because you'll see.
Calling Sky Captain.
When the shadow of evil falls across mankind,
Come in, Sky Captain.
a bold flying ace,
This is Sky Captain. I'm on my way.
one intrepid reporter,
What's this all about?
He's coming for me.
Who's coming?
and a courageous naval officer
What have you got me into this time, Joseph?
Nothing you can't handle, Frankie.
are all that stand between the enemies of the future and the world of tomorrow.
Cap, this is Dex. Do you read me? Come in. Hang on, Dex. I'm a little busy.
Jude Law,
Hold on.
Gwyneth Paltrow,
Can't anything ever be simple with you?
and Angelina Jolie.
It's a pleasure to finally meet the competition.
Yo!
I see it.
Sky Captain and the world of tomorrow. Join the resistance at skycaptain.com.
So definitely a future based in the past. The aesthetic of the 1940s, you've got the military aircraft, the Zeppelins, those sorts of things, the styling, but you've also got these giant robots and everything destroying. And then I'll show you another trailer, Iron Sky. How many of you heard of this one?
Great movie.
I heard somebody say great movie. Okay, so here's Iron Sky. Let's see. It's supposed to autoplay, but there we go.
Where are we from? 60. The Earth. And when did we leave? Brunhilde. 1945. Wonderful. And where did we go? The dark side of the moon. Brilliant.
Dann beginnen wir mit dem Meteor, Blitzkrieg und fegen alle diese Untermenschen von der Erdkarte.
We got peace!
So the plot of Iron Sky is that in 1945 the Nazis launched a group of people to the dark side of the moon and colonized, and they've just been waiting to return to take over the world. So, again, you have that militarism, but the future, retro-futurism, Nazis, as I said, often very prominent in Dieselpunk. Gotta have a bad guy, and there aren't many better than the Nazis. So that leads to a question. Okay, so is Star Wars Dieselpunk? What do you guys think?
Steampunk.
Dieselpunk and cyberpunk.
Okay, mix of diesel and cyber. Why?
Well, it's got the streamlined, futuristic stuff, but it's also got like high tech and lasers and all that.
Lasers, yeah. Lasers aren't very Dieselpunk. Okay. Yeah, so this is kind of a debate among Dieselpunk people, but a lot of people argue it is because it features Nazis. I don't know if you've seen some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. I know a lot of you are big into Star Wars, but a lot of the scenes of the Empire are modeled after pictures from Nazi Germany. So the evil Empire are the Nazis. There are mobsters in there, so we have that 1930s, 1940s. It is pretty dystopian. You have big machines again. So you have these big things, all these lasers. There's an anti-hero, like in film noir. There's old crime dramas and stuff like that. The hero is also kind of an anti-hero. And certainly a good anti-hero in Star Wars is Han Solo, who's clearly the best character in Star Wars. Am I right?
Jar Jar Binks.
That's right.
Yes!
Okay.
Best boy.
And it is clearly retro-future styled. For example, this pistol here is a German C95 Mauser pistol, and what is it clearly the model for? Han Solo's blaster. You just stick on a little scope and a couple little, things on there, and you have that. So again, Spielberg very influenced by that. So there you go. Star Wars could be Dieselpunk, but you can argue about that. Is Indiana Jones Dieselpunk? It has Nazis, it has mobsters, but it's not retro-future in any sort of way. But some people in the Dieselpunk community argue it is Dieselpunk because it kind of started the fandom of that era again. It was like this movie that got a lot of people into the whole 1930s, 1940s aesthetic. So some people would say it started the Dieselpunk movement, even though it's not technically a Dieselpunk movie. So then we get into what I would do if I was a Dieselpunk character. If I was going to make one, I would make a Submariner. Partly because the only people in the 1940s who had beards were Submariners. So if I had to make a character, I got to figure out when you can have a beard. So there you go. Dieselpunk character would be a World War II Submariner. Now we get into punk rock. What is punk rock's aesthetic and value system? It is existentialist. There is really no point except the point that you make for yourself. It is anti-authoritarian, anti-institutional, anti-traditional, and for style-wise, jeans, t-shirts, black leather, sometimes androgynous, very iconoclastic, wanting to destroy the values and clash with the values of the past. So, existentialism, if you're not familiar with it, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the definition here. Existentialism, therefore, may be defined as the philosophical theory which holds that a further set of categories, governed by the norm of authenticity is necessary to grasp human existence. To approach existentialism in this categorical way may seem to conceal what is often taken to be its heart, namely its character as a gesture of protest against academic philosophy, its anti-system sensibility, its flight from the iron cage of reason. But while the idea that philosophy cannot be practiced in the disinterested manner of an objective science is indeed central to existentialism, it is equally true that all the themes popularly associated with existentialism, dread, boredom, alienation, the absurd, freedom, commitment, nothingness, and so on, find their philosophical significance in the context of the search for a new categorical framework together with its governing norm. that was clearly written by an academic. But what we see there is existentialism values authenticity. Be real to yourself. So that goes with the anti-traditional sense, where they viewed their forefathers, generations, as sort of fake. And it was a protest against philosophy because, again, it didn't want to be academic, it didn't want to be rational, it wanted to be real. Rejecting objective science sounds a little bit like the romanticism we heard with steampunk. So steampunk, although much more positive than punk rock, shares some of those sensibilities toward authenticity and passion and feeling. But punk rock is not positive in the way steampunk was. They tended to feature things like dread, alienation, absurd, freedom, commitment, nothingness, everything combined, just a big old mess of do whatever you want to do. So punk rock developed by the disenfranchised teens and young 20s of the 1970s. It was a reaction to the hippie movement and the inauthenticity that they perceived in the older generations. So again, just like when we talk about steampunk, the romanticism was a reaction to the Enlightenment. Everything is always a reaction to something that came before it. You know, every new thing is just a reaction to what came before it. So this is a reaction to the hippie movement and the stodginess of the older generations. McLaren and Westwood t-shirts are an example. They own a store in London that became known for very anti-traditional, in-your-face style. McLaren eventually became the band manager for the Sex Pistols. Their clothing was designed to shock people. For example, the swastika became a big point of their fashion, especially in English punk. So Susie Sue, in an interview, said of her swastika wearing, "It was an anti-mums and dads thing. We hated older people always harping on about Hitler. We showed him, and that smug pride. It was a way of watching someone like that go completely red-faced." So, I just imagine, this young person in the early 70s saying, "I'm so tired of hearing my parents' generation talk about how they defeated Hitler. I'm just going to go ahead and wear a swastika just to aggravate them." But that was their anti-authoritarian, wanting to just shock and go against the older generations. Punk rock clothing, very personalized. You can put patches on, pins on, you tear things, mix things in weird ways, do whatever you want to do with your hair, if you have hair. So very anti-authoritarian, but also very personalized and expressive. You were expressing yourself through your clothing. So it's individual expression through their clothing, yet the irony is they all end up looking basically the same. And that tends to happen over